It's been over 40 years since the Terminator promised an unstoppable future, but for the cast, real life proved far more ruthless than any machine. Behind the iconic action and sci-fi glory lay a series of sudden deaths, crippling illnesses, and lives shattered by inner demons. Let's see who was tragically lost as we reveal the dark then and now of 2026. Earl Bowen as Dr. Peter Silverman. Now, Earl Bowen takes the spotlight. Who played Dr. Peter Silverman? The psychiatrist, the skeptical voice who stood between logic and the terrifying truth. He was 43 in the first film and 50 in the second. At a point, he showed how disbelief could be just as dangerous as the machines themselves. Sadly, Earl Bowen passed away on January 5, 2023, at the age of 81, after being diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in the fall of 2022, spending his final days in Honolulu. But the real heartbreak in his life came long before that diagnosis. In April 2001, his first wife, actress Carol Keane, died from ovarian cancer at just 58, a loss that left him deeply shaken for years. At the same time, he continued working steadily, becoming one of the few actors, alongside Arnold, to appear across multiple Terminator films, while also building a second legacy as a legendary voice actor in major titles like World of Warcraft. Behind that consistent career was a man quietly carrying grief, rebuilding his life piece by piece before eventually remarrying in 2008. And what makes his story so striking is how quietly he endured it all. Even as illness returned near the end, he remained connected to his craft and family, leaving behind children and grandchildren who carried his legacy forward. At the time of his passing, his net worth was around $5 million, not a fortune by Hollywood standards, but a life defined by consistency, dignity, and quiet endurance. Bill Paxton as punk leader. We have Bill Paxton, who played the punk leader, the reckless street troublemaker who crossed paths with something far beyond human control in The Terminator, 1984. At just 29 years old, this small role adding raw energy to the film's opening and showing how ordinary people stood no chance against the machine. That brief appearance became the starting point of a career that would later define blockbuster cinema itself. Sadly, Bill Paxton passed away on February 25, 2017, at the age of 61, just 11 days after undergoing heart surgery on February 14th to repair a damaged valve and an aortic aneurysm. The official cause was a stroke caused by complications from surgery, and he was later cremated and laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills. But what makes his death even more shocking is what came after. In 2018, his family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, alleging surgical errors, a case that was later settled. At the time of his passing, Paxton was still active, appearing in projects like Training Day, 2017 TV series, and having built a legendary career across decades. He became the only actor ever killed on screen by a Terminator, an alien, and a Predator. And his career tells the rest of the story. From Twister, 1996, which grossed nearly $500 million worldwide, to Titanic, 1997, one of the highest-grossing films of all time at over $2.2 billion, Paxton was never just a supporting actor. He was part of cinematic history. His sudden death left Hollywood stunned because he wasn't fading away. He was still rising. With a net worth of around $40 million, Bill Paxton left behind more than success. He left behind the haunting question of what he still could have become. Paul Winfield as Lieutenant Ed Traxler. Then comes Paul Winfield, who played Lieutenant Ed Traxler, the veteran police officer, the calm authority trying to make sense of an impossible situation in The Terminator, 1984. He was 45 years old when his performance giving the story a sense of human logic amid chaos. It also reinforced his reputation as an actor who could bring depth and credibility to every role, no matter how brief. Sadly, Paul Winfield passed away on March 7, 2004, at the age of 64, after suffering a heart attack, following years of battling obesity and diabetes. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Los Angeles, alongside his longtime partner Charles Gillen Jr., who had died just 2 years earlier in 2002 from bone cancer. And long before that, his journey was shaped by barriers few could see. In the 1970s and 1980s, as a black actor, he faced constant limitations in Hollywood, often restricted by roles shaped by racial stereotypes. Yet he broke through with Sounder, 1972, earning an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, becoming one of the very few black actors recognized at that level at the time. He continued building a powerful career with roles in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, 1982, and as Martin Luther King Jr. in the miniseries King, 1978, earning multiple Emmy nominations and a win in 1995 for Picket Fences. And what makes his story truly powerful is how much he carried quietly. He kept his personal life private in an era that was far less accepting, while continuing to work across film, television, and voice acting, including narrating City Confidential until his final years. Across decades of work, he built a career not on hype, but on respect and perseverance. With a net worth of around $2 million, Paul Winfield's legacy isn't measured in wealth, but in the barriers he broke and the dignity he never lost. Franco Columbu as future Terminator. Then comes Franco Columbu, appearing as a future Terminator, a brief but powerful presence in The Terminator, 1984. At 43 years old, he wasn't just another extra. His physique alone made him believable as part of the machine army. Even in seconds of screen time, he left an impression that connected his athletic dominance to cinema. Franco Columbu passed away on August 30, 2019, at the age of 78, after falling ill while swimming off the coast of Sardinia. Reports confirmed he suffered a medical emergency, likely linked to heart complications, before drowning during transport to the hospital. His funeral took place in his hometown of Ololai, Italy. His journey, however, began in poverty so severe it's hard to imagine. Born to a family of shepherds, Columbu spent his early years herding animals and getting into constant fights just to survive. He was small, often bullied, and had no clear path forward, until strength became his escape. From boxing, with over 30 wins, to bodybuilding, he transformed himself into one of the strongest men alive. That transformation led to history. Columbu won Mr. Olympia twice, 1976, 1981, lifted a staggering 340 kilograms deadlift, and even returned to win after a devastating knee injury in 1977 that nearly ended everything. He later appeared in films like Conan the Barbarian, 1982, and worked closely with Arnold Schwarzenegger for decades. By the end of his life, his estimated net worth reached $10 million. But more than that, his story remains one of the most powerful examples of turning raw struggle into global legacy. Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator. Firstly, we talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger, who played the Terminator, the machine, the unstoppable force that defined the entire franchise. He was just 37 in the first film and 44 in the second, at a point when this role didn't just carry the movie. It turned him into the face of action cinema worldwide. What seemed like a cold, emotionless character ended up becoming the most powerful symbol of the series. In 2026, Arnold is 79 years old, still active in business and public appearances after serving as California governor from 2003 to 2011. But on May 17, 2011, everything changed. It was revealed he had secretly fathered a son more than 14 years earlier with housekeeper Mildred Biehn, a scandal that ended his 25-year marriage and only finalized in divorce in 2021 after a decade-long legal process. But long before that scandal, the cracks were already there. Arnold grew up in Austria under a strict father who reportedly used physical punishment. shaping a childhood driven by fear and competition. When he arrived in the U.S., he was dismissed repeatedly. Studios rejected him for his heavy accent, calling his name too long and his body too unusual. Yet between 1985 and 1994, films like Commando, 1985, Predator, 1987, and True Lies, 1994, helped his movies gross over $5.4 billion worldwide, turning rejection into dominance. At the same time, his personal life became increasingly complex. Overlapping relationships in the late 1970s and a pattern of secrecy that would later resurface in devastating ways. Then came the part he couldn't control. Born with a congenital heart defect, Arnold underwent major surgeries in 1997, then emergency open heart surgery on March 29, 2018, followed by additional procedures in 2020 and 2024 to replace failing valves. He admitted that after one surgery, he needed a walker and struggled to breathe, unsure if he would recover. Add to that a motorcycle crash in 2001 that broke 6 ribs, a femur fracture in December 2006, and multiple accidents, and the image of an indestructible machine begins to collapse. From global dominance to repeated physical breakdowns, Arnold Schwarzenegger built a fortune estimated $450 million, but more than that, he built a life defined by survival, not perfection. Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor. Next, we come to Linda Hamilton, who played Sarah Connor, the mother, the survivor, the emotional core that gave the entire story its humanity. She was just 28 in the first film and 35 in the second, at a time when this role didn't just define the narrative. It transformed her into one of the most iconic female characters in film history. What began as vulnerability evolved into one of the most dramatic character transformations ever seen on screen. As of 2026, Linda is 70 years old and still working selectively, including recent appearances like Stranger Things in 2025. Yet her personal story traces back to loss. Her father died in 1962 when she was just 5. And years later, her first marriage to Bruce Abbott ended in 1989 while she was pregnant, a breakdown she later admitted was linked to untreated bipolar disorder. And that disorder shaped some of the darkest years of her life. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, she struggled with severe depression, binge eating, and later turned to drugs, including cocaine, to cope with anxiety and lack of confidence. During Terminator 2 filming in 1991, she suffered permanent hearing loss in one ear after a gunshot scene without ear protection, a physical injury that never healed. Her relationship with James Cameron began during production, leading to marriage in 1997, but ended in divorce by 1999 with a $50 million settlement. She later described the relationship as emotionally exhausting, saying his work, especially Titanic, became the mistress that replaced her. What makes her story shocking is not just the struggle, but how long she hid it. In a 2005 interview on Larry King Live, she openly admitted to suicidal thoughts, violent mood swings, and years of internal chaos that destroyed both her marriages. It took therapy, medication, and years of isolation to stabilize her life. And yet, she returned, with roles in Dante's Peak, 1997, Chuck, 2010 to 2012, and later projects proving she was still relevant decades later. With an estimated fortune of around $70 million, Linda Hamilton's true legacy isn't wealth. It's the fact that after everything she went through, she refused to disappear. Edward Furlong as John Connor. Then comes Edward Furlong, who played John Connor, the son, the future leader of humanity, the boy who carried the fate of the world before he was even old enough to understand it. He was just 13, suddenly becoming the emotional center of the story, the one person the machines were trying to erase in Terminator 2. And overnight, he became one of the most recognizable faces in the world. Today, Edward is 49 years old, trying to rebuild his life after decades of instability. His childhood was already fractured, growing up without a father, with his mother losing custody. And when fame hit, there was no foundation strong enough to hold it. And then everything spiraled. By the early 2000s, he had fallen into heavy drug addiction, later admitting he used heroin and cocaine between the ages of 22 and 26, describing it as really scary. His personal life became chaotic. In 1999, he was sued by Jacqueline Domack over alleged abuse and financial disputes. And in 2009, his wife Rachel Bella filed for divorce while also seeking a restraining order after a drug-fueled incident. The situation became even more disturbing in 2012, when court documents revealed their young son had tested positive for cocaine, leading a judge to restrict Furlong's visitation rights. Arrests followed in 2012 and 2013 for domestic violence involving actress Monica Keena, and in March 2013, he was sentenced to 180 days in jail, serving 61 days while cycling through probation, rehab, and further charges. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. After years of destruction, something finally changed. Following another arrest in August 2016 and sentencing in February 2017, he entered a structured recovery program, spending a full year rebuilding his life. By 2022, he revealed he had achieved 4 years of sobriety, even undergoing dental reconstruction, after the damage caused by drugs. He later admitted he was terrified of who he would be without addiction, but chose to face it anyway. His net worth today is estimated at around $500,000, a fraction of what he once had, but proof that after losing almost everything, he is still here and still fighting to become someone new. Robert Patrick, as T-1000. Now, Robert Patrick stands out as the T-1000, the shape-shifting killer, the cold and almost flawless evolution of the machine in Terminator 2, Judgment Day, 1991. At just 32, this role became the ultimate antagonist that pushed the film's tension to its peak and made the story far more dangerous. The character didn't just make him recognizable, it permanently defined him as one of Hollywood's most convincing villains. As of 2026, Robert Patrick is 68 years old, still working steadily across television and film with roles in The X-Files, Scorpion, and Peacemaker. Yet when he landed the role of T-1000, he was actually broke, living in a cheap apartment, struggling to survive in Hollywood while trying to build a career from nothing. And his story could have ended long before that breakthrough. In 1984, during a boating accident on Lake Erie, Robert nearly drowned after swimming for 3 hours to save others, an experience that almost cost him his life, but ultimately pushed him to move to Los Angeles and start over. Even after Terminator 2, success didn't come easily. He later revealed in August 2022 that he struggled with alcohol abuse in the early years of his career, a problem that quietly affected his opportunities and momentum in Hollywood. While films like Fire in the Sky, 1993, and his role as Agent Doggett in The X-Files, 2000 to 2002, earned him respect, he was never pushed to the same level of superstardom as his co-stars. What makes his journey striking is the discipline that followed. He overcame addiction in the 1990s, rebuilt his career step by step, and appeared in dozens of projects across decades, from The Sopranos, 2000, to Scorpion, 2014 to 2018, with over 90 episodes, and later Peacemaker, 2022, as the White Dragon, proving his lasting relevance. Critics and peers consistently praised his work ethic, with industry recognition growing even without blockbuster fame. After all, Robert Patrick built a career defined by endurance, with an estimated net worth of around $12 million. Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese. Then comes Michael Biehn, who played Kyle Reese, the soldier, the protector, the man sent back in time to save the future before it even exists in the Terminator, 1984. At just 28, he brought an emotional weight that grounded the film, turning Kyle Reese into the human core of a story built on sacrifice and survival. It also positioned him as a key collaborator in James Cameron's early success. Now Michael Biehn is 70 years old, still working in selective projects while living a quieter life. Despite starring in major films like Aliens, 1986, and The Abyss, 1989, he never reached the same level of fame as others in those franchises, something he openly acknowledged, noting he never even earned $1 million for roles that became iconic. And the reasons behind that are more complicated than they seem. In the 1990s, as Hollywood shifted toward bigger stars and blockbuster branding, Biehn began losing major opportunities, including being passed over for projects like Avatar. At the same time, he struggled with alcoholism that lasted into the mid-2000s, quietly slowing his momentum just as his career should have peaked. The frustration reached a breaking point when his character Hicks was killed off early in Alien 3, a decision that angered him so much he demanded nearly the same salary just for the use of his likeness. But his story doesn't end in failure. It shifts into something more personal. Around 2008, he suffered a stroke and later underwent heart surgery, forcing him to step back and reevaluate everything. Instead of chasing fame, he chose stability, directing The Blood Bond, 2010, and The Victim, 2011, while continuing to appear in projects like The Walking Dead, 2022, and The Mandalorian, 2020. Across more than 40 film and television credits after his peak, he quietly rebuilt a career on his own terms. With an estimated net worth of around $4 million, Michael Biehn's legacy isn't about becoming the biggest star, but about enduring an industry that never quite gave him the spotlight he deserved. Lance Henriksen, as Detective Hal Vukovich. We move to Lance Henriksen, who portrayed Detective Hal Vukovich, the seasoned LAPD partner working alongside Traxler in The Terminator, 1984. At 44 years old, he stepped into a role that didn't dominate screen time, yet quietly grounded the film's human side. That performance became a turning point, shaping him into one of Hollywood's most reliable and intense character actors. Today, Henriksen is 86 years old, and remarkably, he hasn't really stopped. Even in his later years, he continues working in independent films, voice acting, and convention appearances, maintaining a presence that spans over 6 decades in the industry. Few actors from his generation can still claim that level of endurance. But behind that longevity is a life that sounds almost unbelievable. Henriksen grew up in extreme instability, abused, neglected, and effectively abandoned. He dropped out of school early and remained illiterate until nearly 30, teaching himself to read by recording scripts and memorizing them line by line. Before acting, he worked manual labor jobs, lived rough, and drifted through life without direction, a reality far removed from Hollywood. And somehow, that chaos became his greatest strength. He rose from those conditions to star in Aliens, 1986, as Bishop, one of sci-fi's most iconic androids, and later led the series Millennium, 1996 to 1999, earning 3 consecutive Golden Globe nominations. With more than 250 acting credits, his career stands as one of quiet resilience rather than overnight success. And while his estimated net worth sits around $5 million, the real weight of his legacy is measured in something far harder to quantify: survival, reinvention, and a life rebuilt from nothing. Joe Morton, as Miles Dyson. We arrive at Joe Morton, who brought Dr. Miles Dyson to life, the brilliant Cyberdyne scientist unknowingly setting the foundation for Skynet in Terminator 2. Judgment Day, 1991. At 44 years old, he stepped into a role that wasn't just supporting. It carried the emotional weight of humanity's future. His performance turned Dyson into one of the most tragic figures in the entire franchise. In 2026, Joe Morton is 79 years old, continuing to work steadily across film, television, and theater. Even decades after T2, he remains active, with audiences recognizing him from major projects like Scandal, where he won a Primetime Emmy Award in 2014 for Outstanding Guest Actor. But that steady career came with a quieter struggle. As a black actor in Hollywood during the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, Morton often found himself confined to supporting roles, rarely given the spotlight despite his range. The irony is striking. In T2, he played the man whose creation would destroy the world. Yet in real life, he had to constantly fight just to be seen. Roles like Speed, 1994, and Scandal, 2012 to 2018, proved his consistency, but also reflected an industry that took far too long to fully recognize his talent. And that's what makes his story quietly powerful rather than explosive. With a career spanning over 100 acting credits, an Emmy win, and decades of persistence, Morton built a legacy not through scandal or tragedy, but endurance. His estimated net worth of around $4 million may not place him among Hollywood's elite, but it represents something far more meaningful, a lifetime of resilience in an industry that rarely made it easy. Decades after Terminator 1 and 2, the faces we once knew as unstoppable heroes and unforgettable characters have been changed by time. And for many, their stories ended far more tragically than anyone expected. From sudden medical complications to quiet, heartbreaking battles behind the scenes, the reality behind this legendary cast is far darker than the films themselves. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful then and now stories just like this.